All right.
So we're going to get started in a few minutes. If you haven't taken a seat yet, just because stuff is on a seat doesn't mean that it's occupied by someone. We don't have a microphone, so please talk as far as you can towards the screen. Because we'll project our voices, but I don't want you not to be able to hear.
Oh, all right.
I don't want to get you like dead center here. Duck out.
There's lots of seats up here available. If you just come up as close as you can.
If there's pieces of paper on the chair, they're not occupied. They're just some handouts for you.
No chairs that have stuff on them are occupied, so just take them.
It's your handouts.
We just don't have a microphone, so I just don't want people to not be able to hear.
They just left.
Is anyone there?
Hey, hey.
Someone sitting there? You're sitting there.
Let me put that to the side.
We're going to start in a very few minutes, so if anyone wants to get a coffee or a cookie or something, it's at the back, because it's just past 7 and we need to get going, so. Oh, thank you. Oh, I got penny. This is the last call for coffee and cookies.
Lots of chairs available up towards the front here as well. If you see papers on a chair, it doesn't mean they're occupied. Grab yourself a chair.
Oh, really? Man, you go. It's a great day.
Yeah. Chairs in front, everybody.
There's 2 here.
2 chairs here.
There's 2 over there. Hi. Yes, good.
If you're hard of hearing, and because we don't have a microphone, I would suggest that you try and occupy. I mean, I can put out more seats up here, but that's just it's a real handy thing. If you're hard of hearing, do try and come up to the front here. There are some spaces available.
Can everyone hear us? Can you hear us at the back? Okay. we're going to get started. So for those few people still at the back, if you want to make your way to your chairs now, so we can get this really exciting evening underway that Owen and I worked so hard on.
Since the elections.
Since the election, because
There was no point before that. Everyone was too distracted.
no, people didn't want to hear from us before the election. Okay, we'll get started now, and my name is Kathy Wonder, and I'm from the Delta Richmond chapter of the Council of Canadians, and this is?
Owen Madden, I am the climate campaigner at the Wilderness Committee.
And we'd like to welcome you to our Tale of Two Rivers event tonight. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, and we were hoping that Rhiannon Bennett would be here, and we're still hoping that she'll be here, but we're going to get started anyways. The Wilderness Committee has some information at the back, and there's also some information, from the Council of Canadians. And the papers on your chairs are two things from the Council of Canadians. And one is just telling you a little bit about us and our upcoming event called This Changes Everything. And it's a really exciting film presentation of Naomi Klein's book. And it just played at the film festival a few weeks ago in Vancouver. So it's Saturday, November 21st from 2 to 4:30 at Kin House in Ladner. And we really hope a lot show up. You don't even have to pay. The film festival charges you, I don't know, $12 or $15, but hey, you can just come. And the next thing is our community salmon dinner and concert, and that's put up by the Delta Fishing Heritage Society Saturday, November 28th, and there's a paper for that. So maybe we could have Rhiannon come up when she's ready. Oh, okay. Oh, okay, okay. Okay, we're just.
Yeah, we'll just get started. We were going to have an official welcome from the Musqueam, but we better get going, and we'll get that done as soon as we can at some point in the night, and we will hear from Rhiannon as well. So, just sort of from my own perspective, or from Wilderness Space perspective, there's two hopes I have for tonight. The first one is that everyone understands a project that is proposed for just across the water in Delta called Tilbury LNG. And we do have a speaker tonight called Owen Finn who's going to really outline that to you. And that covers the first base for tonight, is to get that information to you. And the second hope I have for tonight is that we factor in all of the other projects that are proposed for this part of the world, including an aviation fuel project, a terminal, massive container terminal, a coal terminal, and we make an effort to try and approach this in a way that avoids what's called the whack-a-mole effect, which means we're all fighting each individual fights, and unfortunately we're facing powers that, a little bit more resource than us, certainly have the politicians in their back pocket, and the only way we're actually going to, in my view, be able to take on any of these issues is if we stand back and ask, what are some of the demands we could make that could cover all of these projects, rather than being isolated in our own individual fights. So they're the two goals. You're not here to listen to me, you're here to listen to our wonderful speakers. The second half of the event is a whole hour, is a space for questions and answers, and also for people to just sort of bring forward information on where their individual campaigns or fights are, and there's a number of people here in the room who do want to update you on where they're at, and that will give us that broader view. And then I hope that we'll get into some of the solutions that can capture all of these projects in one. Okay? Are we ready to roll with speakers?
I think we're ready to roll.
All right. Our first speaker is a guy called Owen Finn. I came across Owen in my introduction to stopping LNG in Squamish, And Owen is an ex-partner with KPMG and a project manager of many years' experience, and he knows what do you call them, a boondoogle when he sees one. And he's got a lot of information on LNG. I'd call him an LNG expert at this stage. So I'd like to welcome Owen up here, and he's going to give you a talk on what we can expect across the water. Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
I describe myself as an accidental activist. I had plans for retirement, and none of this was included in that. However, here we go. I don't know how much you know about liquefied natural gas, but you're about to learn a lot more. So I'm hoping that tonight I can keep it to a relatively even and understandable pace, and you get to question my answers after I'm finished. I first heard about LNG. I would add that I have a summer place in Howe Sound, and my kids grew up there. I've had it for 30 years. So when this arrived over the airwaves, it got my attention.
I just came back from Rudong in Jiangsu province near Shanghai. I saw the most incredible feat of engineering you'll find just about anywhere. The longest LNG pipeline in the world over land. It goes out about almost 20 kilometers out from the shore so that they can receive LNG from around the world. And that is where we are going to connect Squamish, British Columbia, to China, as Woodfibre builds their facility in BC to export natural gas over here, a country that needs it very, very badly. And because they're doing that, they've announced that they're opening their head office in Vancouver very soon. It's an exciting day for British Columbia, another milestone in the hunt to make sure we are first in getting to the natural gas market.
That was followed shortly after by this.
We have a plan to grow our economy here in British Columbia, and much of that plan is around creating a brand new industry in liquefied natural gas. That is what's going to allow us to secure tomorrow for the people of the province. And LNG, as I often say, is a once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-generation opportunity. The ability to create 100,000 new jobs, the ability to get paying down and eventually paying off our provincial debt altogether. And we will only bring this industry home to our province if we are all determinedly, purposefully working together. And so we have brought together a group representing organized labor, First Nations, industry, and government to sit down and think about exactly what we need to do together to make sure that the workforce is there to supply the jobs, because you cannot build an economy without people. And we want to make sure, all of us, that British Columbians are first in line for all of those jobs.
So I thought my first reaction was, what's not to like? 75,000 long-term jobs, 100,000 overall, including the construction jobs. British Columbians first in line for those jobs, notwithstanding that BC has since signed an agreement with China to allow temporary foreign workers who have experience of this industry to be, if not first in line, then equal status. A debt-free BC, given how that's at least $69 billion, not counting the run-of-river commitments that BC Hydro has made, which would toss it up over $100 billion. And when you toss that into $600 or $700 billion of federal debt, each and every one of you and your children owes $30,000 before you breathe your first breath. So a debt-free BC is certainly an attractive thing for us to pass along to our children. I thought so. And the cleanest fossil fuel on the planet would produce cleaner air, at least in China, which eventually would blow over in this direction if we're lucky. So these were the promises. You have to understand that liquefied natural gas comes from northeast BC. The gas source is methane, And when you liquefy it, you have to cool it from room temperature down to minus 162 degrees Celsius. So that's colder than it's ever been at Portage and Main by a goodly amount. In fact, it's twice as cold as any place has ever been recorded on this planet. But the gas comes out of holes drilled in northeast BC. And that's up around Fort St. John, etc., because there are three very large formations of shale up there, and by the fracking technique, it's expected that a lot of gas will come out of there. Now, a fracking hole is very simple. You clear off an area, you build some roads to get trucks full of water in, you drill down in northeast BC, 2 or 3 kilometers, and then you line up all the trucks along here, and you hook them up in series, and you pump fracking fluid down into the ground with those trucks. Of course, in the drilling, you drill down till you find the shale seam, and then, as distinct from conventional gas, where you find a pocket and that comes back to the surface, the fracking technique is usually associated with horizontal drilling, where you turn the drill sideways and you drill it along the seam of the shale bed, which is very efficient and has changed the picture in North America quite a bit. Fracking water is about 10 million liters per one of these things. A lot of water, and it's being dragged out of our Williston Reserve. It's out of every available stream. You basically explode the pipe at the end, and the cracks in the rock, you force the fracking liquid down using all these trucks and the compression power on them, and that helps the gas to escape, and it comes back to the surface where you capture it, and you set about cleaning it of all the other things other than methane, and there's quite a few other things. The fracking fluid bubbles up with the gas, and they're supposed to put it in a big dugout, plastic lined dugout, and at the end of the whole process, put it back down the hole. Sometimes that happens, and other times it just basically, there are tears in the dugout, and it disappears into the groundwater. The longevity of a fracking platform is about 30 months before 80% plus of the gas that's ever going to come out of there comes out. So you have to pick up sticks and move over 3 or 4 or 5 kilometers and do the whole thing again. You eventually wind up with a landscape. This is Wyoming, but picture a similar picture in northeast BC, except there's with trees in between the holes. And you've got something that looks like a measles, a bad outbreak of measles on the land. This is very environmentally destructive. In northeast BC, we currently have a caribou herd that's declining in numbers because this thing gets in their migratory routes. And currently, to offset the loss of the caribou herd numbers, we're up there shooting the wolves. When you clean up the gas and you run it down through a pipe, we have a big pipeline coming from northeast BC down to just opposite here that winds up at Tilbury and goes a few other places. This is a typical LNG plant. This is a tanker, LNG tanker, and you can see 5 of these large flasks. Think of them as big thermos flasks. And this thing is a liquefied natural gas storage, highly thermally insulated. There's pumps that take the gas, the liquefied gas, and put it out to the tanker. And you can think of this, which is the inlet, as a very large refrigerator which consumes vast amounts of power to take the room temperature methane and cool it to minus 160. Typically, they use seawater to cool, to carry away the heat involved in that, but sometimes it's air-cooled. We don't know for Tilbury which one it's going to be, but there are some implications when you consider which one that I'll explain in a minute. So, large refrigerator, storing the gas as a liquid, pumping it out to these things, and just for scale, this thing is 3 football fields long. And if Tilbury comes to pass, you're going to see a few of them. There are currently, I think, 11. This is out of date already because Steelhead LNG has received NEB approval. There's a whole pile of them. The Discovery LNG is the easiest one to deal with because last early this year, its American parent went bankrupt, so it's kind of stretched. And there's a whole pile in Kitimat and Prince Rupert that are proposed. And these are 3 mega plants of 20 million tons or so each for the ports of Prince Rupert and the fledgling port of Kitimat. Those are big plants, 20 million tons of LNG per year. The one that you're probably most concerned with here is the Westpac Midstream one, which would be at Tilbury, which is a relatively small one of 3.5 million tons. But that was still involved because these tankers carry away up to 60,000 tons a day. That's about 2 tankers a week that would visit you if this indeed comes to pass, up and down the river. The wood fibre one has been in the news as of the last 2 days because the provincial government gave its environmental assessment approval, despite the entire set of municipal councils around Howe Sound and most of the politicians saying we really don't want it, go somewhere else. But the provincial government, as you are aware from those videos, is rather keen on this industry. In total, the NEB approved exports are about 130 million tons of LNG per year. So if all of these proceed, there's going to be, that amounts to roughly 1/2 of the world's current demand for LNG worldwide. So it's a pretty ambitious project for BC to capture 50% of the entire world's LNG appetite. There's no guarantee that all of them will go ahead, but the government is keen on about 82 million tons of LNG per year coming out of northeast BC, being liquefied on the coast in these big LNG liquefaction plants and being shipped off to mostly Asia. Your current Tilbury plant, if everybody here I think has seen it, has a big tank and has this wall around it, which is a containment wall. So if it ever leaks, it basically it leaks into this thing. This is a very specially constructed retainer wall that has specialized concrete in it that if it pours out at -160, it doesn't go in the river where it frees the river solid. It basically is contained here, and any ignition points are carefully removed from here because this is one flammable gas. The liquid itself, much like petrol, doesn't burn. It's the vapor that gets you. So that's a stow containment wall, and the proposal is to put another one here, phase 1 expansion, and the phase 1 expansion would take it from being a real baby, 33,000 tons a year, to about, well, that's about 12 or 13 times the size. This is the current expansion going on currently. I believe the entire job content of all that is about 7 individuals. So these are things that are capital intensive, but not very job intensive. Anyhow, the phase 2 that you have not yet heard about is a proposal still not applied for, but on the books of the company Fortis, to take it up to 3.4 million tons for this Westpac Tilbury expansion. And that's a whole different league entirely. And the proposal is being made because Fortis wants to supply about 1 million tons a year to Hawaii, which is considering its financial options because they have a law that requires them to go to low sulfur diesel to generate their electricity, and they're looking at the relative prices of LNG and low sulfur diesel. And but recently the government of Hawaii decided that $1, and this is a statement from the governor of Hawaii saying $1 spent on LNG is $1 wasted. We really need to go to renewables. So Florida is challenged in that, and this may not occur, but the phase 1 expansion is already underway. What would come up and down the river? It would be, currently Florida ships tanker loads in 20-ton insulated tankers all the way up to Inuvik, and there are proposals to various other towns who use diesel generators as emergency electrical generation or prefer LNG over diesel. They're going through your streets. They go through the streets of Vancouver with these 20-ton articulated trucks, and that's one option. like here. And then there are barges, possibility up to 1,500 tons. There's this experimental ship out of Korea which basically stacks all of those up in a big thing, but because to get to Asia it takes 10 to 14 days, these things are not perfect insulators. They have to degas a certain amount of their liquid, they boil off. And rather than expel it as a big plume behind the ship, they try to use it as part of their engine power to get all the way to Asia. But this is a one-off. There are very few tankers, LNG tankers in this range on the Adriatic coast. There's a few, but of the 400 tankers in the world, about 399 are these things. 60,000 tons of LNG in one ship. They carry a 12.5 to 13 meter draft, which is over and above what the Fraser will allow, and rather than dredge, well, there's a significant problem in that the Tilbury, the George Massey Tunnel, has only got 11 meters of water over the top at most times, and so the proposal to replace the tunnel, which isn't a bored tube, it sits on the mud in the bottom of the river, to replace that with a bridge high enough for these things to get under, is on the cards, and the government keeps talking about it. It's about well, if it borrows from anything from the one over the Fraser, farther up the river, then this will be a $2 or $3 billion project, and will of course change the traffic choke point from the entrance to the tunnel to the Oak Street Bridge, which. So these are what you're looking at most likely coming up the river. They contain some safety problems. This I took from, this is how sound, I took a picture of a ferry, Queen of Surrey, and photoshopped in the typical LNG tanker. This one's 948 feet, or about 3 football fields long. It is twice as long, twice as wide, and twice as high as this BC ferry. It rejoices in the unfortunate name of the Aqua I-bomb. So, inside one of the tanks of these things looks like this. Because LNG ages and gets slightly different densities, and that causes some burping problems inside the tank. Oh. You have to have this giant stir stick continually swish it around during the course of the voyage. It's dangerous otherwise. These walls are made of polyurethane foam, plywood, and some balsa wood. And you hope they stay together, because if the LNG at -160 gets out into the hull of a tanker, marine steel, it gets rather brittle at -160, and a good whack with a hammer and you wind up with bits of LNG tanker, and a whole other problem with dealing with 60,000 tons of liquid. This is an LNG tanker coming into Boston Harbor. This is a 4-story apartment block, and this gets the citizens of Boston very nervous. So much so that they give it some special treatment. When it comes in, they close the bridge it passes under. They close all the marinas for 20 minutes before and 20 minutes after this thing goes by. And they give it 4 tugs, because this thing doesn't steer very well at low speed. It has to go 10 to 12 knots, which creates a whole wake problem that they're having to deal with. But they also get the special attention of the U.S. Coast Guard, because this is regarded as the #1 terrorist target in the entire U.S. and has been since 9/11. So they give it some special treatment. They go out 20 miles. They check that the captain is indeed the captain, the crew is indeed the crew, and they're in charge of this vessel, and they have no malicious intent. And this entire process cost the good city of Boston between $60,000 and $80,000 for each visit. The mayor is not keen on that for obvious reasons, but this has been in place since 1972, and he can't seem to get rid of it. It was approved in the days when, before they had significant regulations to deal with the location, the siting of LNG facilities. Why is this important? Because under the International Maritime Dangerous Goods, these gases, volatile gases, are classified just below explosives. And they have special insurance arrangements which are different from oil, where oil has this international reserve fund that is up to 1.3 billion and that each country can draw on for ameliorating or repairing or mitigating the damage of one of the oil tankers comes adrift. That fund does not apply to this, so it's up to the ship owner, or typically, to put enough insurance on that would compensate the municipality if something really went awry. Fortunately, something has not gone awry so far in 40 years of shipping, where although they've grounded, they have collided with other things, they have done lots of things. These LNG tankers have not had, to date, a significant leak. Loss of containment is what they call it, but it's only a question of time before one of these things happens. So after 9/11, the US government said, I think we need to be more careful about how we site liquefaction capabilities in plants. So what would happen if we had somebody put a hole in the side of a tanker, either deliberately or accidentally, where it whacked something? Another ship, etc., or a terrorist who might have troubles. So it's basically, they hired a group called the US Sandia National Laboratories, and they said, well, methane is lighter than air, but liquefied natural gas has a particular habit if you spill it, of sucking up all the water vapor. And around a river or an ocean, there's a lot of that. So, and when it does that, it forms a white fog that's heavier than air, and it basically sits close to the water, warming up from -160 till it gets to basically to room temperature or air temperature, where it does indeed float off into the atmosphere. But if in that interim, where it's spilling, spreading across the water, and getting to the right flammability level of between 5 and 15% gas-air mixture, if it hits a flame or a spark or a passing boat or somebody's wooden stove or a misfiring electrical thing, you have a large fire. So the US Senate committee, chaired by Joe Biden, said, well, how far and how would this thing go and how lethal would it be? So Sandia said, well, worst case, we think up to 3.5 kilometers on either side of that tanker, you could get a very severe burn. But most, between 1,600 meters, 1.6 kilometers, or roughly a mile, and 3,500 meters, you could survive, but you would risk serious burning. Between the tanker and 1,600 meters, the chances of you surviving, this is again worst case, is close to zero from burns. And within 500 meters of the tanker, when the concentration of gas to air would be insufficient to cause it to catch fire, the fact that it is at -160 would give you what I call the human popsicle effect, where you are basically frozen solid. Not a nice scenario. But what the US government did then was to put in place what they call a waterway suitability assessment, which is take the Sandia zones, 3,500 meters either side, 1,600 meters either side, and 500 meters either side, and they went out to the 3,500 one and said, it is not good to site an LNG facility where that zone would stretch onto a populated area. And we should basically refuse all efforts to put an LNG facility where either the plant itself is that close or the passing tankers are that close to significant population centers. So they have basically instituted that in their environmental assessment, and the first step in it, close to first step, is something called a waterway suitability assessment. Under US rules, and that's only 20 kilometers south of here, your Tilbury plant, your wood fiber plant, and several up north would not be allowed to site where they're proposed, because that might happen. More a fireball than an explosion. And the problem is, if you map those zones onto Richmond and Delta, then you can see why the municipal councils of Richmond and to a certain extent the municipal councils of Delta are seriously concerned with the idea of putting the proposed LNG facility, the Westpac facility at the Tilbury location. It was maybe okay when Tilbury was this little tank for top-up in wintertime for the Vancouver people who needed gas to heat their houses, etc. in winter, but this, on this scale of 3.5 million tons, that's a totally different animal, especially with these ships going up and down the Lower Fraser.
Oh, and can you point to where we are right now on that map, just so people can see where we are?
Well, there's the tunnel. Anybody want to? Steveston? Right there, right? So you're in the 1,600 meter range here. This is the 3,500 one here. So basically, you're in your dead zone. If the worst happens, and you know there's a lot of traffic goes up and down this river between log booms and tugs of various sorts. And the proposal is also to put a coal port, a Delta port, where you'd have a coal ship and a LNG carrier. And the river's not that wide here. These things are 300 meters long. The river is at most 500 meters wide. And turning this thing, because it has to come in one direction and then it has to be turned around. They're proposing kind of to hitch the back end of it to the shore, and then when the tide's running out, the whole thing will swivel around. Of course, they have to wait for the tide going out in order to do that. Right? I guess hitching the front of it and then swiveling the back end round is possible, but that's not what they proposed. So we're in the fairly dangerous zone, and south of the border, this would not happen. The reason we have no regulations is this would be the first export LNG plant in the entire country. There isn't one in Canada. There is a tiny little one on the west coast at Kenai, Alaska, that's 100 miles from anywhere, Anchorage particularly. That's out where it should be, out in the middle of nowhere with no significant population around. And they bring the pipe to it to feed it with the gas. But we don't have any regulations in place, but we have a provincial government who's hell-bent on getting this industry, because there's a race on. The race is who can make LNG the fastest and get to Asia the quickest. And in the meantime, the regulations will hopefully catch up. Regulations catching up after significant dangers are encountered is not something that we really should be doing. And we can ask any citizen of Lac-Mégantic what the end result would be. LNG plants do occasionally do nasty things. This is one in Skikda, Algeria, where it sucked some of the gas into the air conditioning system, and the first spark it hit caused 27 people, all of them employees at the plant, to die, and about $1 billion property damage. This was located outside any significant area of population. You also have to ask where the fuel for these things is going to come from. Is it also going to come up the river? And you know, you have a competing proposal to do jet fuel to a terminal right opposite an LNG plant. And if there's a combination that will give you the shivers, that's a combination. So, Vancouver's ability to fight an LNG fire. You pour water on an LNG fire, it goes, oh yes, I want to be more gas and I want to be more flammable. So you have to kit out your local fire department to deal with something that needs 60,000 tons of very flammable gas put out. And only high-density foam can do that, and most fire departments are not kitted out for that. So the cost of all that is going to be borne by all the good citizens of Delta, which is the municipality who's charged with it, who will also be charged with trying to devise an escape plan for all of you if this thing catches fire, to get you as far and as fast away from your homes as you can get. A very tall order, and one which will be borne at your expense. To know, remember I said it forms a white cloud? This is something that happened in China not so long ago, with 20 tons of it in a truck.
A video has emerged of a terrifying moment a gas tanker exploded on a highway in China, killing 5 people and sending visible shockwaves across the road. People were filmed desperately trying to escape as smoke built up from a tanker that had overturned on the major motorway in central that's been on Province on Saturday. After the road is involved in thick smoke, a massive blast rocks the highway and surrounding valley. 5 people, including 3 firefighters, were killed in the explosion. 2 fire trucks and 5 other vehicles were destroyed. The tanker was carrying liquefied natural gas and had leaked around 20 tons before the blast. The tanker was still burning on Sunday afternoon. 7 vehicles, including 2 fire trucks, were destroyed in the blast. The cause of the accident is still under investigation.
Just last year, Fortis, with one of these 20-ton trucks, rolled it over in the Swanback Highway. They were very lucky, although this doesn't have this is a bit like the Dock 109 tank truck thing. They don't have the special ISO container style on this thing. They have no protective barrier preventing the tank itself coming in contact with the ground. These are not ISO standard, International Standards Organization. They were very lucky the thing didn't leak or explode, and they figured out a way to get the tank back on another truck. But these trucks are rolling through your streets. If you like 20 tons going up, this is a typical 60,000-ton tanker. I don't fancy my chances if one of these decides to go the wrong way. Apart from the safety issues, there are some emissions issues. A typical LNG plant emits a great deal of carbon dioxide because most of them, particularly the big ones, they burn about 10% of their gas supply to generate electrical power. These things suck up huge amounts of power. One of the plants in the north, and there are 6 of them proposed, would consume all of the electricity of the proposed site C dam. 1. So we need another 5 to satisfy the appetites of these things. And they're come in at $9 billion a piece that each of you, me included, are going to have to pay for over the next little while, because that is on the public purse. And it will be included in all of your electricity rates going forward. We are generating out of Site C the likely 13 cents per kilowatt hour, and the agreement to sell it power if they need it to the LNG industry is 8.5 cents. The complication with that is, of course, that they will bankrupt the BC Hydro and have WEC Bennett turning over in its grave. You've probably heard something about carbon capture and storage today. I urge you to read in your newspaper about how successful that's been. Anyhow, every 100 tons of LNG is going to produce ultimately 332 tons of carbon dioxide greenhouse gas. We're trying, of course, in the world to come to an agreement about reducing that. The LNG plant is part of an exploration in wellhead. The leaks of methane, which is 86 times worse than the carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas, are significant, and there's a great battle between academia and industry over what exactly that wellhead leakage is. They're called fugitive emissions. And depending on that leakage rate, LNG is either worse or better to burn than coal overall. The original promise that the air would be made cleaner in China if we ship LNG there ignores 2 things. One, China has never promised to use it to generate power in lieu of coal-burning plants. And the second one is that we have, between Alberta and Saskatchewan, we have 11 coal-burning plants, and one would have thought that we might look to those to clean up the air first. We have encapsulated into law in our province the requirement to drop our GHG footprint by 33% by 2020, from about 60 million tons a year down to about 45. And if this 87 million tons of LNG exports who burn their own gas to generate electricity goes ahead, we're going to actually wind up with double that as our greenhouse gas footprint. In other words, now this isn't just an ambition, this is legislated, this is law that was passed by the Campbell government, but lacking any teeth. Yes. This man has some problems with and has declared that it is a moral imperative for us to do something. I'm going to skip through briefly to economics. Back when Premier Clark announced this, We had an event called Fukushima where the price of this LNG in Asia rocketed to close to 20 bucks. The problem with that is that no LNG producer in this province can make it for less than 12. And the second problem, and more material problem, is that today the world price of LNG is $7.45 and likely to stay there over the next 15 years. Now, I don't know of any business who can make stuff for 12 bucks and sell it for 7 and expect to last a long way. Contributing to our taxes and whatever, unlikely. The Penman Institute says even if it goes to 12 bucks, it's going to take 14 years before the good taxpayers of BC see a penny to support healthcare and education. If this industry went away, it together, and you throw in mining, constitutes less than 2% of the BC economy. So the idea that the world will end if this doesn't happen is rather shy of proof. Conclusions. I'd like to quote Sheikh Yamani, who was a Saudi oil minister, who said, "The Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones, and the world oil age will end long before the world runs out of oil." So, and then there's a quote from Wayne Gretzky about why he was such a good hockey player. Those quotes are probably valid, but some of the later political announcements may be a bit more. Thank you.
Hi, I'd like to introduce Rhiannon Bennett. She's going to, there, I just see that. She will do our official welcome and talk a little bit about Indigenous peoples' relation to the river and the salmon culture. Welcome, Rhiannon.
Antha Rhiannon Bennett, Leaksna, Komakwea, Eladner. Just want to welcome all of you here to our unceded territory. My name is Rhiannon Bennett, and I'm from the Musqueam Nation. And this is our unceded territory. My cousin at the back there, over their head. Her family actually lived, but she has known living relatives who lived in our village that wasn't far from here. So it's not that long ago that our people have been pushed out off of our land here and onto our reserves. And her family still stayed in the community, so even though our village was gone, her family has still stayed connected to the land here. So I just want to acknowledge that her presence here today and her connection directly to this land. So I'm not going to talk about all Indigenous people because that's well out of my scope of knowledge. I can simply share my family's history and connection to the river and the connection to the salmon. And that connection goes back for a time immemorial, since the very first sunshine. And my family has lived on these waters. These waters have sustained our life for countless generations. And the change that I've seen, even in my own short lifetime, the changes that I've seen in our cupboards and in our stocks that we've had from salmon. This year, I think, is the first year in my life where my family doesn't have enough salmon to sustain us through the winter. And that has never happened before. And that makes my heart really heavy to know that my relatives don't have enough salmon in their cupboards to last them through the winter. We relied on that food as sustenance. That food is a part of who we are. And it's, like many of you have different foods from where you come from and from your family. And imagine not having access to that, to not having access to grain to make your pasta or your breads. And that's the similarities between our fish. That is our basic food and sustenance, and it is embedded in our culture. But it's not just the salmon that's suffering right now. When I was little, we used to have ooligans for dinner. We used to be able to go out and get enough ooligans to have a meal. And a few years ago, my uncle went out, set his net to get ooligans. He got 12. And I'm not sure if you know what an ooligan is, but it's a fish that's about this big. And 12 ooligans is not going to feed a family of 6, let alone the family of 20 that my uncle fishes for. And like I said, all of this has just happened in my short lifetime. You know, to see what my grandmother and my grandparents have seen change in their lifetime is really upsetting. And when my late grandfather was a fisherman, he fished his entire life until he was too old to go out on the water anymore, and then he sat up on the dike and watched. And that was his life. He was able to support all of his children, to support his grandchildren, to have a home, to have vehicles. And then now, when you go out into Seaston during fishing season, when I was little, there would be times where there'd be no boats out there because they were all out working. And now you go there, and there's boats there all the time. And that's really sad that that kind of economy is coming to such a grinding halt that people can't sustain their families from our fish anymore. And our relationship with the salmon is, like I said, it's really part of our culture, and it's really hard to explain culture because it's something that you just do and something that you just have. So to have something that's so integral to your culture removed or to have lack of access to is really upsetting. In my community of Musqueam, we always put out a big feast and take care of our families when they're going through hard times. And a few years ago, we had 6 funerals, 12 funerals. We had quite a few funerals that all happened very close together. And we went through all of our ceremonial fish that we had in our reserves. So when it came time to have a community celebration, there was no fish for us to serve. People were like, "Where's the fish?" And it's like, well, we used it all. And that's not something that we're accustomed to. We're not accustomed to running out of salmon. So listen, and again, just to say again how heavy it makes my heart to know that there's cupboards out there that don't have enough salmon to get them through the winter. When I was little and my family was fishing a lot, we would have fish 5 days a week, 6, 7 days a week. We would have fish during fishing season. And that doesn't happen nearly as much anymore. And that was enough to sustain our family, you know, to not have to go out to the grocery store and to buy food that was trucked in from somewhere else or imported from another country. This is food that comes from right there. And now we have to go and get food that comes from somewhere else. And I know there's been a lot of disagreement between our community and the fishermen in Seaston and Ladner over the years about our right to access fish. And that's been really challenging growing up in the community to see neighbors fight with each other over the fish and to say you don't have more of a right to that fish than I do. And it's really made some tough relationships in our community where people who used to fish side by side no longer talk to each other anymore. Or when you have politicians like John Cummins build his career on trying to extinguish our Indigenous rights and title. And then to have him replaced by another equal person, Carrie Lynn Finley, who also did a lot of effort to extinguish our rights and titles. I'm so thankful that they're gone. When I was in high school and my cousin Bud Sparrow won our case that solidified our right to access fish, I was really proud of that. And it's like, yes, we have a right to harvest our food, and that is part of our economy. And then it was taken another step forward to have our native-only commercial fishing. And for me, I was a little uncomfortable with that. And over the years, I've thought about it, and I thought about our food and ceremonial openings. And what I've come to believe is that we should just have one opening, and that it's our fish and our business and what we do with it, that the government shouldn't be controlling what we do with our harvest and our economy. The salmon has been an integral part of our economy since time immemorial. And if you go to some of the other communities on the island, you really see how that's true, how fish is traded and fish is the integral part of our economy. So when we are limited to our economy, that's when our people suffer. So it's really important that we are able to practice our traditional economy and to be able to manage it ourselves. We have managed our economy for a very long time. When you think that, let's say the first sunrise was over here, and contact probably happened over here, the government of Canada probably happened over here, and we're about here now, and how little fish we have left. To see how quickly that happened. In the span of about this much in time, those fishing stocks in that river has been drastically altered. I think we know a thing or two about managing our economy and our environment. And it's something that should be revered and respected. And another, just to highlight that point, is with a recent tragedy the other day on the island in Tofino. Who was the first people to get out of the water and to pull those people out of the water? It was the people of Ahousaht. And the same thing again, when the ferry went down, it was the people of Hartley Bay that were the first ones there. It's because those people understand and respect the water and are paying attention and know how critical it is to get there first and how there is not a second to waste. And it's all connected. That's the same thing that we're talking about the fish, and the same thing that our other presentation was about, was that you have to respect the nature and the power of nature and to be a part of it. You can't fight it. So it's been interesting for me growing up on next to the water, to the river, to see how things have changed and to see how my family dynamics have changed, to see us go from stable fishermen with steady, reliable income to times of hardship and to times of challenge, and to see people have to go and find other sources of income and to get retrained and reskilled and do other things. And to tell you, the life of a fisherman is not a job. That gets in your heart and your soul. You know, if I should have brought a picture, you know, just to see my papa sitting up on the dike. I'm sure some people at the back there, Mr. Massey, can appreciate seeing my papa up on the dike there and that passion in his eyes and how hard it was for him to be too old to get out on the water, but his spirit was still there. He would sit up on the dike and he would watch his children and his grandchildren doing what he has done and his parents have done and his grandparents and so forth. So it's not just a job. It's in your heart and in your soul. And it's been in our blood for a very long time. And recently I've had the opportunity to take our canoe down the Fraser River. We went from the Harrison River and joined up to the Fraser River and came all the way down and around to Semiahmoo. And just to see the changes and the impact that man has had on that river. Wherever there's a bridge, there's the eddies and the back eddies, and the flow of water changes. So it's not just simple as let's just put a bridge down, but even that will have an impact on how the water flows and how the fish flow and how the life around it grows. And that river didn't just feed us, but that was our traditional highways as well, to go and visit our families and to perform our economy and our culture and our gatherings. And it is still very much a working river today. It's very dangerous out there. You know, when we are out in our canoes, we have to be watching for log booms and for big tankers and for little boats, and it's very busy. And it's a huge impact on the wildlife that calls those waters home. So it's really important that we think about the whole picture. We can't just break things down. We can't just break nature down into one thing, like the other gentleman talked about the caribou. So now we've impacted the caribou, and now we have too many wolves, and now the wolves are being called. So there's no way that we can just affect one piece of nature without having that ripple effect and going out and affecting many, many other systems and animals and plants, because we are all connected. So when we impact one, that ripple effect is huge. And that's not thought of often enough when policies are made and laws are passed or things are done, as to what is the ripple impact of that. is you really need to look at the whole picture, the whole river, the whole system, as to how those things are going. I think that is all I have to say in my heart today, so thank you very much for having me come today.
Okay, thank you so much, Rhiannon, and this is going to be our last speaker next. We are a little bit behind time, so I am going to ask him to be as tight as he can, unfortunately, so we make sure we have enough time to discuss all the challenges we have facing us as a group. This is John Terborg. He's working on, so I'm a climate campaigner, and I have to be honest and say I'm biased in the sense that I get involved in these projects to stop climate change from happening, and climate change can feel like it's happening very far away. We imagine deserts increasing in Africa and places like that. But John has been studying the effect of rising sea levels, which is a climate impact, on farming in Delta. And there's a salination effect going on, which John will explain to you, but when we stop an LNG terminal, when we stop the coal terminal in Fraser Surrey docks, we're actually doing our own part to try and prevent the irrigation water for Delta from being overly salinated. Unfortunately, we have to set up the slides a little bit, so just give it a few minutes.
So while John's doing that, why waste an opportunity? If you would like to be on the email list for the Delta Richmond chapter, could you please put your name and your email on here, and we'll be in touch with you. There's also more information at the back, so I'll just pass that around. Thanks, everybody.
Would it be possible to ask Owen one or two questions about his presentation while we're waiting?
Yeah, do go ahead.
Owen, I actually have a question. That you mentioned, one of the slides mentioned Sandia as a company that had done some research.
Yeah.
I thought I'd seen something on the television recently where some guy from Sandia was saying that LNG was the greatest thing in the world and safety wasn't an issue. Have you seen that piece?
Yes, I have. I called up, it was an interview with Dr. Michael Hightower of Sandia National Laboratories. And I called him up afterwards and pointed this piece out to him. And bottom line is it was a fake interview.
Fake?
Yes, and as soon as I pointed that out to ResourceWorks, who posted it, they withdrew it.
So fake how? Like the actual guy claiming to be from Sandia was fake?
No, he was online. There was an interview with a male reporter from who claimed to be from a newspaper in Vancouver. Right. But the questions and the answers were not what he remembered and recorded because he had a witness.
Okay.
And denied that the questions and the answers had anything to do with one
so
another.
So kind of a mismatch?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. That's very helpful.
I have a question for you. I know down in the States, that in the United States they do a lot of fracking, and they understand that there's a way that they can do it a lot more costly than the normal that would guarantee that the waste would be back into the ground or back to you.
Yeah, that's called carbon capture and storage. The companies, the current economics of carbon capture and storage, where you capture the carbon and put it back down under the ground and sometimes use it for something else, are such that it's about $100 a ton currently to do that. The carbon price that each of us pays by way of carbon tax in this province is $30 a ton. So the companies look at it and go, do I want to pay $100 to put it back in the ground or 30 to leave it off in the air? And that's a very simple equation for most boardrooms.
Are any of them doing it here now?
No. They're doing it in Saskatchewan, but if you read the newspaper today about it, Saskatchewan is currently paying through the nose to an oil company, Cenovus, for the failure of SNC-Lavalin to deliver a working carbon capture and storage system. And it's a severe embarrassment to the Saskatchewan government. There isn't a single carbon capture and storage operating in Canada at the moment, and there's only one LNG plant in the world that pumps the carbon dioxide back down under the ocean and underground, and that's in the north end of Norway. And that's marginally successful itself. Yes?
What about the earthquake threat? I mean, I understand that in Oklahoma, where there's lots of fracking, it's gotten really bad.
Can we let John do his presentation and get straight to that question when John is finished? Is that acceptable? Yeah? All right, let's do it. Sorry. Okay, yes, I'll try to be quick. It's very image heavy, so we'll be talking about a lot of pictures, and I'll try to go pretty quick. So if you have questions, I'll definitely be able to answer those towards the end. Just a little bit about me. I'm a Richmond resident. I'm engineering, civil engineering graduate from UBC. I've recently done a master's degree in land and water systems, and one of the kind of projects I got involved with was some of the questions that local agriculture has had about some of the kind of industrialization and development in the Fraser River and how that might affect agriculture locally. And so this is just a slide presentation I've given in different formats before. It has to do with salinity and how that affects kind of the agricultural water supply.
Speak up a bit more.
Okay, thanks. So this is just an outline of where I'm going with the presentation. And so we have our lower Fraser River system. We're all pretty familiar with it. We have Delta and Richmond. So these are the two kind of farming communities I've been working with. Both draw the majority of their irrigation water from the lower Fraser River. It's also kind of very much a tidal and salinity impacted length of the estuary, so it's a very dynamic place. And farming has been using the river for over 100 years, and it's a system that's worked well. And so questions about industrialization is something that comes up as something that the local agricultural interests would like to know more about. And so moving on to the agricultural water supply. This is actually a projection for what it's going to be in 50 years. This is over the course of the summer. This is probably April, May through to maybe September, October. And so you see a big peak in the middle of kind of the summer, and this is kind of a quantity of water that's used. So this is actually just for Delta alone, but this is kind of all the produce and all of the agriculture, how it seems to peak. And so the system has to meet that demand curve. The red is actually what cranberries need over the course of at least the summer. So they do need to be watered, and then they actually need a lot of water at harvest time. But that just gives you an example of kind of where, and in terms of what climate change is projected to do, is that in about 50 years' time, it's anticipated that we'll need about 50% more water just to maintain our current rates of crop production. And so the system that we're investing in, that we work with, should be able to hopefully keep up with those demands. And that's just to maintain a current level of crop production. That's not for introducing, bringing more farmland on, or trying to do, bring in other crops. And sticking with the water supply is the Fraser River predominantly, and the water demand, which we just saw, how the water gets from the river to where it's needed in the farmland is through these irrigation intakes. And this is the delta side of the river. You can see Burns Bog. There's actually a few more intakes a little bit farther west. But with the South Fraser Perimeter Road project, because it did impact agriculture, a part of that project had some compensation that was to improve the water supply. And so a larger station was kind of brought up to about 80th Street in Delta, and the idea was that this would be capable of servicing the majority of Delta's agricultural water needs in the future. But this was done at a time, maybe about 8 years ago, when they were planning this, and this road has now been up for probably maybe about almost 2 years now. But not all of Delta's agriculture was included in kind of the design upgrade. Also, there was definitely no investigation of a tunnel coming out, or changes to dredging, or any of these other types of changes that may occur with kind of these industrialization projects. And this is on the Richmond side of the river, and this is actually from the East Richmond Water Supply Plan. And you can see that Richmond draws some water from the south and also from the north arm. And actually, Richmond has been looking into, again, what increases of salinity in the river might mean for its agricultural system. And so they're looking at what options might be available to redirect its system to take more water from the north and have the north be the primary feeder for agriculture. But this is, again, is just in East Richmond.
And so South Richmond down here, as far as I'm aware, doesn't necessarily have a plan in place. And so if, again, changes to infrastructure are needed and a highway is being proposed to be changed, well, it would be nice to fit in for what the long-term ideas are for agriculture in Richmond and the south of Richmond as well. So moving on to the next slide, the salt wedge. And that's let me try to explain this in a simple, slow way. Salt water, we all know, ocean water has salt in it, and salt creates a higher density water. So if you have the fresh water coming in from the river and the salt water coming in from the ocean, they don't mix right away because these are two different fluids with very different densities. And so the higher density ocean water actually forms a wedge and goes underneath the river water that's coming out through the estuary. And at different times of the year, depending on the river flow, be it the freshet in the spring where there's a lot of snow melt and runoff through the province, well, there's a lot more fresh water pouring through, and that keeps the salt wedge or the salinity kind of out near Steveston. But then towards the end of the summer, when things dry out across the province, there's less fresh water in the river, and the salt wedge maybe hangs out around New Westminster. But at the same time, there's tides that come up and down twice a day, every day, and so this is kind of a moving phenomenon. And so this has always been there, but with the climate changing that we're aware of, with kind of proposed industrialization and dredging the river, with projections for sea level rise, the farming communities are interested in what all these things mean for their systems, and they're looking to farmers think forward generationally. So if they're investing a lot of money in infrastructure or they're planning, they want to include all of these kind of variables in how they choose to move forward with how they farm. Anyways, this is a typical range of tides in and around the Fraser River. It's about 11 feet. This is kind of like a textbook on estuaries and the Fraser River, just with its relationship with flows and tides. It performs a bit more as a kind of, they call it a partially mixed estuary, where the gradients of salt, because of the friction in the bed and the coming and going, it it just suggests that the salt comes up, gets a little bit mixed, and it comes back out, and this is what's coming past our irrigation intakes. And so when we choose to bring water into our kind of ditch systems, both in Richmond and in Delta, we have to take into account when it is appropriate, when it is acceptable, and what are the kind of tolerance or salinity levels that are acceptable. And so moving on to salinity, this is just a kind of a little chart that shows various kind of types of crops, and you can see at the top, which is the most sensitive crops, those cranberries. Cranberries grow in very acidic soils, so you definitely don't want to be putting salt on there. And even if we're talking about a little bit of salt, if you apply just a little bit of salt to land over, it accretes and it accumulates. So farmers want to avoid just salt getting into their irrigation water from the beginning. It's a lot less of a challenge and a lot less of a management issue if it's not there in the first place. And so we take something at, again, we saw that cranberries are about 400 microsiemens per centimeter, which is about 250 parts per meter. It's considered kind of a sensitive crop. And so that's kind of a good workable threshold for other forms of agriculture. Again, there's a lot happening here. I'll try not to make it too complex, but there's about 2 graphs of information superimposed. So you've got your normal kind of tide rhythms. This is over about 2 weeks or so of cycles. And you also have the green, which I think is where in Delta, where their agricultural intakes are, because they're mostly gravity fed. And then you have superimposed in that where the salinity levels are, and that's in red. And you see that, well, through the course of this time period, they're unable to draw water from only here. And that's the opportunity, that's the window they have to take in fresh water with their current system. And that can be changed. Maybe you can introduce a pump. Maybe you can relocate your intakes. But for that study, that was suggesting like that's how they manage their water for farming in Delta. This is a similar scenario where you have this is kind of farther west, maybe towards West Ham Island. This is right at that 80th Street intake I was showing, and you can see that in the red is their average salinity level for October. This was the blue was the average salinity level for November, and here was that 400 kind of cranberry threshold. So you can see why, with that infrastructure upgrade for the perimeter, or why they chose kind of 80th Street as a place where they wanted to kind of put all of their investment and bring that, make that upgrade the intake there, because it suggested that in these 2 months, the average salinity level of the river was within what was permitted. And so again, this is a study that was done before all of the industrialization that we were talking about here tonight. This is in Richmond, at 6th Road. The city of Richmond has some salinity monitoring equipment there, and you can see, again, this was done in 2011, but in August, at the time they were taking the study, they found that the salinity level at this intake was acceptable and safe for agriculture about 70% of the time. And then you look at the next month in September, again, maybe it was a drier year, it was later in the season, and you see that irrigation water was only acceptable at that intake 25% of the time.
Sorry, what year was that?
This is 2011 when they were using the. And so, again, the farmers that I've been working with the Delta Farmers Institute and as part of also Richmond's agricultural community, they've been trying to do basically a grassroots study to figure out how salinity affects their irrigation water supply. They've reached out to other river user groups, so conservation groups and fisheries, Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance, also industry and forestry. They store logs in the water as well, and they're concerned about salinity as well. So some of the variables that they're interested in, they've fundraised to do a model, have a computer model of the river done, which should inform a monitoring program just to kind of calibrate and make sure that the model is valid and accurate. Some of the variables would take into account sea level rise. This is historic sea level rise for the past century or so, and you can see it's been rising, and as of the last 30 years or so, it's actually kind of accelerating, and so I think this represents about a foot a year, and we're, I think, projected to increase the rate that sea level is rising, and so this is the guidance to give for anyone who's building infrastructure that's kind of sea level impacted, and they say that over the next 100 years you should account for sea level being about a meter taller, and again 2 years out, 200 years from now, another meter on top of that. So we'd like to incorporate these projections into any type of analysis that we do. Again, so these are just some of the variables. Delta does their own sea level rise planning. This is the typical hydrograph for the Fraser River. Again, this was from a few years ago, but you can see in red, which was, I think this was made in 2012. The green and the blue are the extreme maximums and minimums for the past 100 years of data. But you can see that this is what our river, how it behaves. So in the winter, we've got very little flow, big peak in the summer with all of the snow melt. And we've got, this is kind of what's projected for climate change, is that where we had a big pronounced peak, it's actually happening earlier and not as pronounced, and it's probably there's more variability in the rainfall and weather that we're having. Again, I think Owen mentioned the 11-foot depth, which is the limiting dredging limit for the Fraser River, because that's kind of the depth of where the tunnel is in the river. And so if the tunnel is gone, as proposed with this bridge project, well, it would probably be a little bit deeper than the 11 feet that it's currently been, and the tunnel's been there for 50, 60 years, so it would be a little bit of a change. This is a cross section of kind of what the tunnel looks like in the Fraser. This is a current kind of dredging navigational channel. It goes up there past New Westminster. And part of the depth, to know that So we have about 11.5 meter depth. Historically, if we didn't do anything, the Fraser River was about 5 meters deep on average. So post-tunnel removal, we've heard different things about what the immediate changes to the dredging would be. And the Panama Canal has been recently, I think, adjusted to accommodate ships that are at least 18 meters in draft. And so in some of the literature that comes out with the local chambers of commerce or people kind of advocating for some of these industrial projects, they kind of quote needing to be up to 18 meters. Any type of study that we would do would definitely kind of look to reflect what some of those realities could be. Getting towards the end of it, this is actually from another resource in California. I've been talking to some people who do have questions about agriculture and estuaries and being river situated. This is from Bay Delta Live, the San Joaquin Sacramento River system, which provides a lot of water for the Central Valley in California. There's an incredible amount of pressure on this river system, and I think about 2/3 of the rainfall that falls in California falls above this particular spot, and 2/3 of the water that's used in California is used below it. So there's a lot of pipelines and conduits, and so this is just some of the technology they use. This is a web-based kind of portal. I think there's 300 monitoring points that populate the data here. It's real time up to the nearest 15 minutes, and so these are examples of what's possible. We probably don't need to rely on something as complicated as that, but it just shows that there are resources and opportunities out there to draw some good practices for kind of informing some of what we'd like to see come out of a study. And anyways, there hasn't been a lot of kind of agricultural impact or environmental impact concerns addressed in the kind of current industrialization projects. I don't know when that's supposed to be. They already have a construction date expressed. So I've been working kind of, like I said, on a very kind of grassroots level to try to get some of these things initiated. Like I said, we got the funding for a salinity numerical model, and we're working to get funding for a monitoring program. We're expecting to do about 2 to 3 years worth of kind of in-river monitoring work just to kind of flush out some of those assumptions that we have here. And again, working with a cross-disciplinary set of various sectors. And this is hopefully just information to all of you. I don't know what's going to happen with all of this. And I think the best case scenario is it suggests that everything's fine. But this is just the agricultural set of questions. There's also, like I said, fisheries, forestry, many other groups that also have questions about what's happening in the Fraser River. And hopefully there's an opportunity for all of those voices to be heard as well. Thank you for listening.
So thank you, John, for getting through all that. I know that was hard for you to get through all the information so quickly, so thank you for doing that. We are in the questions and answers stage now. We do have about 35 minutes, not a full hour. There was a question that I cut short. I'm going to be respectful and start with that question that I did cut short earlier on. I see you have a question, but put your hands up if you do have questions. And also, this is also an opportunity for some more of the challenges that are facing the river to be explained, because there is also an aviation fuel project proposed just across the river from the LNG terminal. I have people here from that campaign tonight who do want to give you an update on where they are. But the question was earthquakes, and I'm guessing whatever provisions are being put in place for Tilbury LNG to make it earthquake-proof. Is that where the question was?
No.
Right.
No.
Well, it's going to be Owen that's going to be answering this.
It was about the increase in earthquake threats from fracking.
Yes,
Which I understand Oklahoma has had increased earthquakes because of fracking.
Not just Oklahoma, but Alberta had 4.3 magnitude earthquake, which was for the first time a government agency said associated directly with fracking. Crack all that rock down below and suck all the gas out, the rock tends to resettle. We are particularly sensitive on the coast here to the idea that we could trigger a very large earthquake. Those earthquakes that have been recorded have happened up in northeast BC. There is no fracking on the coast because there's no fracking shale formations here. We hope that fracking doesn't trigger anything down here. And the likelihood is small, but the effect, the disaster that could happen would be rather large. But Oklahoma, Pennsylvania have all experienced significant increase in earthquake activity since fracking started in those areas.
Did Nova Scotia as well?
And not so much yet, no. I haven't heard of one.
There's been some reports of BC earthquakes as well. At the second so what happens is, normally you get the earthquakes when you inject the fracked water back into a reservoir. What's been happening in BC is, scarily, the very first frack job, when you first send the frack fluid down, has caused earthquakes this year. That was reported in the Vancouver Sun this year as well.
The proposed wood fiber plant in Howe Sound sits on two very large known faults, and the pipeline that runs to it is a whole series of faults as mapped by the BC Ministry of Energy, Mines and Resources. The idea of a LNG plant sitting on an earthquake fault doesn't make me very happy, and in First Nations refer to Howe Sound as Earthquake Alley. So I'm not too happy with that idea, as are most of the people who live there, but the government just approved that LNG plant, and they totally ignore that factor.
Can I just, it's just been brought to my attention that the newly elected MP for, is it Richmond East, Easton Joe Pachi Salado, is here. So, is that okay?
That's me.
Okay, well, thank you for attending, and,
Well, thank you for doing this.
okay. Okay, so now you know where he is, and.
So I believe this, sorry, the lady in the red jacket was the next up.
I heard Harold Steve speak once, and he mentioned that if they remove the tunnel and dredge it all, the salinity with the high tides is gonna come way in and affect the farm irrigation of the crops. Just by removing that, it's gonna leave room for the, are you gonna be studying?
Well, that's what this study would look to find out, right? I think all of those variables I mentioned, we would model them independently, in isolation, or in combination. And so you'd figure out, well, how much does dredging or tunnel removal create a change as compared to what the natural background kind of climatic changes may bring for the river. So this would be looking to try to investigate that question.
Who will look at your study?
Well, it's been done independently. That's why the farmers are interested in kind of raising and kind of managing the science to be able to answer their questions and not have some of the project proponents kind of impose kind of an answer to them. So that was the idea of looking at it independently.
I guess my question would be tied right into that. Is the study going to be available in time?
Yeah.
That's the question. I've been thinking about this for the past year. It would have been nice to have something in the river this year, because it was it's the driest year, or the warmest year in human history as we've recorded it. So it would have been nice to have that baseline information. But again, it probably depends on funding and cooperation. So again, like this bridge project proposed to be in construction 2017. That leaves 1 full year, maybe 2 at most, and we're not really doing anything yet. So it'd be nice to see some more kind of cooperation from everyone who's kind of come to the table.
There's no climate test happening in any of these individual assessments for any of these projects. It's a big problem. I did say at some point tonight I'd like to talk about asks we could all have that would influence all of these projects, and that's one of them. They have to do a climate test. They're not for Kinder Morgan, not for Fraser Surrey Dock, not for the LNG terminals. Climate change is off the table. Barbara, I think you were probably the next one that had your hand up. So go ahead.
Well, you wanted me to give an update.
Well, no, it was your request.
Well, okay.
Ask a question, give an update, whatever you feel like doing.
Well, I think people might want to know, because many people in the room here have actually supported us over the years. So in case there are a few that don't know about the jet fuel aviation project, it's 4 years in the work, maybe a bit more. That would see tanker traffic, super tanker traffic on the Fraser River, positing it at a jet fuel tank farm just around Silver City, 80 million liters. That got approved. That was probably December last year. There's a citizens group called Vapor, I'm sure you've heard of us or seen our signs, and we've been working those 4 years against that project, trying to inform people, writing letters, and all the things you do as a grassroots organization. So after it got approved, its environmental certificate, we took them to court. It's the Vancouver Airport Fuel Facility Corporation, VAFFC, and the Attorney General, so we took them to court. It's a little group of citizens, and we lost. Okay, so it was a huge ordeal. Thank you everybody who has donated to us. Yeah, we've got a pathetic little cookie jar back there. Actually, we're getting countersued by VAFFC for court costs. Poor organization, you know. So they've come after our little community group. There are probably 5 of us that are liable, that were on the board.
Are they suing you for costs?
They're suing us for costs, $16,000. So we have that right off the bat. We are again asking our lawyers for advice. We don't know if they're going to charge us for that. But we haven't completely decided yet whether we'll go back to court and say this isn't fair. We're just the little kids on the block. But if we do that, we have more legal fees. So that's where we are right now. But for sure, we have the $16,000. So that's the update. But I do thank you all for supporting us. Most of you know about it. So good. Anyways, thanks.
Don't forget, that's a lot of jet fuel sitting right across the water from an LNG terminal, which Owen just told you about, can explode. It's mind-blowing. Self-policing, who was next?
I
Let's go here.
have 2 questions for Ian, but they're not unrelated. The first one has to do with the environmental reviews that are supposedly done or to be done. There's some talk that it's really duplication of effort and money if it's done federally and provincially, but you have to question how rigorously it's being done and the long-term consequences, or looking further afield to see the consequences of the jet fuel and the LNG. So I'd like you to comment on that. And the other is the makeup of the NEB, the National Energy Board. I'm kind of thinking they're people who have been involved in energy and minerals and oil. Are there any environmentalists on the board that you know of?
I'll answer the second question first.
That's easiest.
No. The most recent appointments have all come out of the energy industry. It is very biased. And as evidenced in the Kinder Morgan hearings, even consultants who have been proponents for Kinder Morgan providing evidence have actually recently been appointed to the decision board of the NEB. So its objectivity is, I don't think, questionable. I think, I'll pick your stronger word for it. It's a national disgrace that that's what we have as an energy regulator. It is not certainly world-class nor world-leading or anything like it. So it's hopefully going to be changed by the incoming government. And on the first one, your question again was?
It has to do with the environmental assessments, reviews.
BC, the Campbell government signed an agreement with the federal government that where you have something that requires both a provincial and a federal environmental assessment, the feds would step aside if BC asked them, and the BC would do most of it, the environmental assessment, and then the Minister of Environment in BC would sign off and then send it to Ottawa for what BC hopes is rubber stamping. The BC environmental assessment process is appallingly bad. It only allows scientific evidence from those consultants that the proponent hires, and any effort by citizen scientists or reputable university scientists to inject a contrary viewpoint or more scientific facts is generally rejected. This government has got an accelerated approach to environmental assessments for LNG plants particularly, and I have just come today from the north where the lack of an approved environmental assessment or an environmental certificate hasn't stopped those pipeline companies from drilling 200-meter swaths through the forest from Kitimat all the way back to central BC, without approval of anybody for an environmental assessment certificate. Basically, the BC Oil and Gas Commission is becoming a very dangerous and powerful animal indeed, able to drill holes through our national or provincial parks, able to level our forests that are crown land and owned by you and me. We really do have to do something about that line. Those environmental assessments conducted in BC are, in general, a disgrace.
There's a word for that, they call it regulatory capture, where the regulators are being captured by the industry. It's happening all over Canada and BC as well. My man at the back here, because he has had his hand up for a long time. Go ahead.
Yes, Owen, the film that you have there on China, your opponents are claiming that it's propane gas, not LNG. And the properties of propane over LNG are quite different, as you know. So, what is it in fact LNG or is it propane, or do you know?
And I think the difference is, from any point of view, academic. The propane has actually got a much narrower...
Propane's heavier than air and natural gas is lighter, so...
Yeah, but the effect, the Sandia effect is still still relevant. You take minus 162 gas, and you put it anywhere where there's near water, and you saw there was a river right by there, and it sucks up the water vapor and becomes heavier than air and spreads as a low fog. That's just the best scientific evidence in the world is Sandia's report. There are other dispersion models in the world that predict a much larger area of destruction from an LNG spill. And
propane or LNG, or do you know?
I'm sorry?
Is it propane or LNG?
That says LNG, and I believe it. Yes, it is. The proponent, Fortis has said that that's LPG, liquid petroleum gas, which has slightly different physical characteristics and much lower flammability levels than LNG, but the difference is academic, and I'll stage my PhD in chemistry against their word on that.
When you say that they claim it's propane, I've never heard that. Where is that coming from?
Well, we're with a group, and Fortis was out here 2 weeks ago giving us a presentation on how safe it is. I was fire chief of wood fiber for 25 years, so I understand the area there, and I share the concerns that you share with us as well. I also have concerns about the jet fuel coming down the river. Our good newly elected official here did go publicly stating that he would reopen that and look at the possibilities of looking for a safer route for the jet fuel to be done, and I'll hold Joe Pescasino to that. And I believe he's here tonight to get that more information, because Joe will do his research. I've known Joe for years and trust him immensely that he will do a good job if he states he will. Okay, so that for vapor, that's a good acknowledgement that they are re-looking at, and I believe Carol Day is meeting with Joe tomorrow on those issues. So there's a number of us that do have concerns in the area of what's happening, but I just like to get my facts straight for who's saying what it is, and your proponents are stating no, it wasn't.
You heard the broadcast.
Yeah, I know it's in the broadcast, but there's lots of broadcasts where they got the information wrong.
Okay, so let's try and keep it to a question, because questions are good. Sorry, who's been up? Everyone wants to ask a question. So, oh yeah, so Otto, go ahead.
We've talked enough about the problems, and looking at the dozens of projects that could come along, we've probably got a dozen plans for the river right now. Something's got to be done right now. We're several years behind the ball right now. And the best thing we could have worked for was a change in government. We've succeeded in that. Unfortunately, we still have Alice Wong in Richmond, but I wouldn't mention her name again. We've got to work on the solutions now. Let's not talk about the problems. What can we do about them? And yes, we've got to meet with Joe, and Joe's made some initial good statements, and we got to work in Donway on meeting with him to get him on. I've got to get hold of Richard Cannings in the Okanagan. We've got to get the Green MPs together and get after Trudeau. I think Trudeau, well, I didn't vote Liberal, and I didn't vote for Alice Wong where I live, but that's neither here nor there. But we've got to get the Liberals and the NDP working together with the one lone Green Party member in Ottawa to change things. We've got to get the environmental legislation in Canada back to where it was in the 1980s. We have to restore the legislation, and we can talk about terrible EAOs, environmental assessments, this type of thing. Yes, they are terrible, and the provincial one is one of the worst in Canada, and the federal government, in their wisdom, delegated the federal responsibilities to the greatest conflict of interest in the Lower Fraser River. They gave them to the Port Metro Vancouver. That's going to change instantly. How can we have the biggest developer? The biggest developer, the biggest threat to farmland in British Columbia and the Lower Mainland, it's responsible for environmental assessments, environmental decisions. It's a farce, really. And this is one of the problems we have with jet fuel. The problem's the bare minimum review, and they said that's all we have to do. That's all we ever do anywhere in British Columbia. And the judge ruled that, yes, they can get by with a minimal review, and in their token public consultation through the proponent, that was quite adequate. It met the need, and that's why Baker lost their court case. And now, bless Air Canada with their environmental policies, WestJet, Air China, Lufthansa, KLM, they are now basically suing us for $16,000 to cover some of their court costs. And that's why we have a donation jar at the end of it. We ran out of money because we spent $55,000 on the court case, which we thought was quite a good case. Our lawyer thought it was a good case. So we've got to get after our MPs right now. I think we should give up in Victoria until we do have a better government in place there. The feds have to turn things around in this province right now. We can't wait for Christy Clark. She's part of the problem, not part of the solution. And for First Nations, with all due respect, where were First Nations when we wrote them 5 or 6 times to get on board for jet fuel in the Fraser River from all First Nations in this area? We never received a single response. And we've all got to get together and work together, and the only response we received from one First Nation was, we don't deal with environmental groups, we only deal with other nations, we'll only deal with the province and federal government. To some degree, that bullshit has to stop. We have to all work together if the Fraser River and the salmon are important.
Yeah. Okay. So let's not try to be too divisive in this. Tonight's not about sort of creating divisions, but actually reaching out to one another. That is a good segue into something that was taken from us by the federal government called FREM. Does anybody know what FREM stands for? Fraser River Estuary Management Plan. Yeah. You know when I was talking about not playing whack-a-mole? Well, there was actually something set up for that, where people like Harold Steves, for instance, Otto may have played a role in it, I'm not sure, where people were actually engaged in planning out what industrialization in this region would look like. Port Metro Vancouver shut that down in 2013. Under federal laws that entitled it to do so, and took all the planning that happens in all of its lands back to itself. So goodbye, friend. One of the next steps after tonight, because often there's great energy in a room like this, people want to know what's happening next. One of the ideas we've had is to bring everyone back to talk about how on that one level we can all work together to get FREM back, because it was a way in which civil society was allowed to speak to decision makers about what sort of vision for this part of the world they would support. Like I said, Port Metro Vancouver is the federal government's pit bull. It's out of control, and the only way we can reel it back is to have a voice at the table. So I'm putting it out there, and if people are interested in a follow-up event to this event, which is focused on the Fraser River Estuary Management Plan, which used to happen, doesn't happen anymore, I'd love to have you there. That's my pitch. Yeah, question, Joe, go ahead.
3 questions. The first one, John, where do you get your funding? Any government money, or is it all private?
Right now, most of it's been sourced through Delta's agricultural relationships. So I think that the majority of their funding has come from a provincial initiative that's like a climate change BC, like the agricultural stream of that. And that's something that Delta's already been engaged with for a few years, and so we've kind of turned this question into that stream, and so that's probably provided maybe a third of what they would like to raise. The rest of what we've been asking is going through other kind of fisheries conservation groups. We just are writing an application through kind of the Sturgeon Conservation Society to the Habitat Conservation Trust. Another group we've gone through is the Pacific Salmon Foundation. And we're having a meeting next week where we're bringing in a lot of these river user stakeholder groups, so we're going to find out, one, what are the questions that everyone has, how do they overlap, how do we resource a study, maybe there's contributions in in-kind expertise people who are on the water already, where if it's just equipment that needs to be checked every 2 weeks, it can happen. So we're looking to find out like what like the bare bones baseline level of kind of funding or resources are needed, and then what would it take to do something that, again, like up to what they're doing in the Bay Delta in California. And so it can really just sit within that. In terms of other funding, yeah, like federally, a lot's been cut out of kind of fisheries and environmental sectors and streams, and so.
That will probably change.
Yeah, I hope so, because even the funding that, say, like some of these groups or some of these local organizations are working with, it's quite, their mandate is quite limiting. They're like, well, we see the value in this and it's great, but like we can't be working there because we have to have these deliverables, and they're pretty isolating, and they're definitely not looking at the river in a very holistic way.
My second question is for Owen. Is there a substantial difference in the carbon footprint between natural gas and liquefied natural gas? And if there is, given the geopolitics and the natural gas industry in the U.S., can Canada have any natural gas industry other than LNG?
Canada has a natural gas industry. I mean, Fortis supplies natural gas to each of you.
So it's internal. So
yeah, but it's internal. It's as I said, if you wanted to divert it, currently the natural gas that flows from northeast BC, roughly half of it goes to bake oil out of the tar sands in Alberta. A quarter of it goes to the U.S. to supply Seattle and other places with heat, and 1/4 of it goes to the lower mainland, where it's ultimately through a series of pipelines sent to Vancouver Island, and it satisfies the usually domestic needs there. Its big commercial customers used to be pulp and paper mills, and most of those have gone away. So Fortis has a little more gas and is planning to export it, and also to use about 60,000 tons of the production in 3 LNG powered tankers that powered ferries that the provincial government has ordered and is currently building in Gdansk, Poland. The overriding concern is always climate, which is at least, and whether you have burn coal or you burn LNG is an academic argument as to which is better or not.
And what if, and apologies for interrupting, what if you're burning coal versus just natural gas? The argument I get from folks is that there's been a huge reduction in carbon footprint in the United States because of the huge use of natural gas versus coal.
Oh, no, I will interrupt you, go ahead.
I would argue that that's based on those numbers. It all depends on the escapement, the fugitive gases typically from wellheads, where when it's finished, it's 30 months of production. They put concrete down the wellhead, and they put concrete around the outside where the pipe comes up from the ground, and there's a gap through that in the rock. And they hope that it lasts, but it typically finds a way to come out, and that's not good. So it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
So the carbon footprint isn't from the process of turning natural gas into basically explosion or liquefied natural gas. It's just from the whole process.
Yes, but there is a carbon footprint associated with it. In order to get gas to China, you have to liquefy it because it shrinks it from something the size of a beach ball to something the size of a pebble.
No, I'm with you. I don't want to ship it to China. I don't want to ship it out. The argument that Americans have is that it's been great for the United States because it's gotten rid of their coal. Can that also be applied to Canada?
Yes, there are 11 coal burning plants in Saskatchewan and Alberta alone. If you were to buy the argument that it's cleaner burning than coal, deal with those.
So yeah, just how I describe that is like the gas that used to come out of BC came out of conventional deposits. It didn't need to be fracked out of the ground, and the depletion rates didn't look like what they look like now, which is that over 3 years, your wellhead, if you frack it, loses 80% of the gas that's there. So then you got to open a new wellhead and a new wellhead, and in the Mackenzie Delta, you have one puncture to a large deposit that just flowed out for many, many years. Because we're creating so many fracked gas wells, there's a lot more escaped what is methane. And methane is a driver of climate change to a much quicker degree than carbon dioxide. So that's a very convoluted way of saying because it's fracked gas, the argument would stack up if it came out of a big giant deposit of gas and it replaced coal in a coal burner, yes, there's a climate save. But because that's all gone, and we have to frack for it, the academics, or Howard and others at Cornell, are looking at, well, how much fugitive emissions are there? And then they're factoring in, and how quickly does the climate change when you let methane out, not just carbon dioxide? They're coming to the conclusion that, and that's what Owen means by the academia behind it, they're not sure actually is frack gas cleaner than coal.
So how much more is methane than carbon
So
dioxide?
over the first 20 years, they've talked about over 80% more impactful, or 80 times more
86
impactful.
times. The GWP, global warming potential of methane over a 20-year horizon is 86 times that of carbon dioxide.
So I heard 20.
It drops to 20 over.
That's over 100 years. We're most concerned with the next 20 years, and one of the reasons is the Delta Council got a report 18 months ago that estimated the cost to Delta taxpayers of a 1 to 2 meter ocean level rise over the next 30 years. The figure came out at $9.3 billion to raise the dikes and increase the pumps. The Delta Council looked at that and said, oh my God, if we divide it over our ratepayers and over a number of years, we're looking to explain some very hard numbers to each of the homeowners and ratepayers in the city of Delta. You might want to ask about that report.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left, and we have several. So we've got Rihanna and Doug. So Rihanna, Doug, and then we may be running out of time. So.
I just wanted to respond to the comments about the frustration of the lack of involvement in the local bands. And I certainly am in no position to speak on behalf of any elected official or anybody working in the band office. But I would just like to say that I hear your frustration, and what people need to understand is how long we've been fighting this already. So we have been defending our land and defending our water since settlers arrived, and all of these drastic impacts have happened in our territories. So I appreciate that all of you are very passionate about the work that's going on here, and sometimes are frustrated when you don't feel like you're being supported from the local Indigenous people. But you need to appreciate our position and how long we've been fighting for different things, and how many different things we're fighting for. We are fighting for our language, we're fighting for our children, we're fighting for our elders, we're fighting to educate the settlers about the true costs of colonialization. And there's not very many of us. A lot of these departments in the band office that deal with these things are stretched very thin. They have multiple projects on the go. If you look at around the room today, how many different projects are on here, and our departments, our band office, are dealing with this and all of the other environmental and impacts that are going on in our territory as well. So you need to be a little bit of understanding, a little compassionate towards the work that Indigenous people are doing, and all of the work that's happening behind closed doors, in the boardrooms and in the courtrooms that's going on. So I think that there's a little bit of compassion that needs to be shown if we are not able to fully engage as you would like, or as would be beneficial, because I agree that we are all stronger together. However, the reality is that our communities are stretched very thin and are taxed with a lot of problems that we need to deal with. And there's only so many hours in the day, and there's so many people that can do the work, and that our communities are doing the best that we can for the benefit of our people, and what benefits our people benefits everybody else. So I just want to acknowledge your frustration, and I'm sure many other people's frustrations have had phone calls unanswered or disappointed in the lack of response. But we need to understand how long we've already been fighting these things, and how many other things are on our tables that we're dealing with as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, well, I'm the son of the late George Mackey. On the whole aspect of the Fraser River, I think Otto Langer says we need to get back to the basics, and we did have those basics at one time. The university had a full-scale model of the Fraser River estuary, and anytime any major proposal came forward, either bridging the river or accommodating an industry on the river, it went first to that model to see what its hydrological effects and its geological effects would have on the estuary. And that's the MP from the new MP. There's something that should, in order for us to get anywhere on this, we can't be picking at each one. We need to look at the whole picture of the whole estuary even the watershed area, right from Prince River down, you know, even like the gentleman said, he's got a salt study done. Well, that could be done under that aspect of a full hydrological model, as I should say, that you could be done at any university. I'm sure they'd be interested in doing that. I don't even know where the model is now. It's stored somewhere. But the government shortcutted everything. The federal government has shortcutted everything to do that's going to be in their way to do what they wanted to do. And that's why we're at this stage today, where we're fighting again to get that back again. I mean, you talk about the water, having enough fresh water from the river. You got to remember this climate change also affects the interior watersheds. The cutting down of the pine beetles has affected the watersheds, and the ability for the snow to be kept and not melted away. I was reading an article just the other day where the cattle farmers were upset because the people were objecting to the fact that they were taking too much water to feed the cattle, and as a result of that, it destroyed the fish-bearing streams. So those factors have to be all-inclusive in anything you go forward with. And I thought this meeting tonight was to look at what we're going to be doing, as Otto Langer said, to salvage and maintain the healthy Fraser River that's good for the First Nations and for non-First Nations. Anyway, there you have it.
This actually, one of the reasons for this meeting when Owen and I were talking was we wanted to do a little bit of an educational, get people together, and those people that want to do more work or go and do some more planning and some actions, and please let us know. There's some sign-up sheets. We'd love to hear from you. The Fraser River Estuary Management, that's something that we really need to get back. And Trudeau himself has talked about community governance. And so, Joe, that's community governance right there. Oh, he's must be talking to somebody else. Anyways, so this was step one, and we hope that you have got some information to think about, and hopefully it'll spur you to take some action, and we'll want to do more. The reason we called it A Tale of Two Rivers was that it's up to us. What kind of river do we want? Do we want it to be continually industrialized, or do we want to save it? The Fraser is the world's greatest salmon river, and we're the people, and it's in our hands, and I think that it's time to stand up for our river. Yeah. Because, and so thank you so much for coming. I would love to thank our wonderful speakers. They've been really, Brianna, Owen, John, thank you so much. It was really a wonderful evening, and I learned so much. This is going to be his the last event that he has organized with the Wilderness Committee, because he's moving on. And I just want to thank him for all the contributions he's made to the environmental community and getting people together and spurring them into action. We certainly do appreciate it all.
Thanks very much.
There's lots of questions. Now, land is the new oil and food is the new gold. And I think we have to start looking at what BC can offer in that regard instead of just